My gratitude to BW Business World and NewsX for having me here. Good afternoon to the audience. Now, my book is on the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War. Why 1971? Well, 1971 started as one of the most traumatic years in the history of the subcontinent, but it ended with one of the greatest triumphs in the history of the world. 1971 began when General Yahya Khan launched a campaign of extermination, of rape and genocide in what was then East Pakistan, to which a democratic India responded by launching the Mukti Bahini and creating an independent nation. Now, there are already countless publications on this topic. There are so many books, there are so many research papers. Why did I choose to write a book? Well, the answer to that is threefold. The first is, mine is the first publication that covers every single aspect of the war, including intelligence, diplomacy, logistics, the planning and execution of operations, land operations carried out by the Indian Army, air operations by the Air Force, and maritime operations by the Indian Navy, mission by mission, sortie by sortie, battle by battle. Thank you. Regarding this, I have personally interviewed over 120 veterans. My work has been supported by the Center for Air Power Studies in New Delhi, the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, and the Center for Land Warfare Studies, and of course, the Cavalry Officers Association. I also became the youngest civilian member of the United Service Institute during this process. Now, the second reason happens to be my own generation and my friends. You see, I see a lot of school students and college students here, so you can relate with me on this one. We haven't been taught a word beyond 15th August 1947 in school history because our educational institutions consider everything to be too political. So my second motive was informing my generation that India's greatest triumph does not lie 20,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago in mythology. It lies in our present history, and it lay in 1971, where we fought a battle for justice and ethics. There were 10 million refugees in our country. There were 3 million dead bodies in our neighbor, and over 1 million women were raped. And one of the proofs for this point does not come from us, but from the Pakistanis, because when General Amir Abdullah Khan Niazi was asked, "Sir, why are your men raping all these women?" he said, "What do you expect them to do? Go back to Sargodha, to their wives in West Pakistan?" So this is the mindset, this is the dictatorial rule we were fighting. The third reason, thank you. The third reason, of course, is propaganda. Now, propaganda is quite irrelevant from a historic perspective. But a study of propaganda is essential, especially by a historian. You see, propaganda governs the morale of civilians and troops through a war. But how it's presented in history governs the myths that we go by when we think of such subjects. Now, in Pakistan, propaganda is actually very, very simple. There is an organization known as the Inter-Service Public Relations Branch of the Pakistani military. Their job is to very intelligently concoct battles and skirmishes that never happened, build up kill counts that never took place, and publish them as official material because they consider themselves to be invincible, unbeatable. On the Indian side, it's a bit more complicated. You see, 1971 happens to be the only conflict we decisively won. I know many people are patriotically bothered by that, but that happens to be the truth. Because of that, it's a victory, and as we know, victory has many fathers. Therefore, propaganda on our side simply happens to be people who want to claim credit first. That, no, it was my plan that won the war. It was me. I was the first person in Dhaka. This was my strategy, my tactic. A historian's job is to find truth in a sea of propaganda. As you all know, truth is the first casualty of war. Now, recently in the 2019 surgical strikes, one of the things our government and our news anchors, more importantly, said is that the first person to get to social media and talk about what happened is the actual winner, because as you saw, Pakistan said, nobody ever entered our territory and bombed Balakot, and we said, no, we launched 6 x 2,000 bombs into Pakistani territory. But the thing is, this is not something new. Twitter is just the most recent platform it's on. In fact, it was a Roman historian known as Quintus who once said that the victor is not victorious until the vanquished declares him so. In 1971, we have a surrender document. So there's not much to talk about. But how did we go from a massacre to the largest surrender after the Second World War and one of the quickest victories in the entire Cold War? Well, for that, I studied every brigade's history, every division's history. I personally went through the Air Force's Form 1500. I went through every mission report. Like I said, I personally interviewed 130 people. But people do tend to overclaim their role in such things. Now, one of the things I've avoided, which many historians love to do in oversimplifying subjects like this, is draw comparisons. I call these terms as headlines, because a historian will write that this was, for example, an event was India's D-Day, or this was our Chernobyl, or this was, this genocide was like the Holocaust. I find this to be a very amateurish practice because it diminishes from the conflict you're talking about. If what I'm trying to bring to light or what I'm talking about is not, if I cannot talk about its significance, I will say, oh, this was our Pearl Harbor, or oh, the thinking of this ship was our Titanic. Well, then I haven't done justice to the subject until you're able to view a subject in its own light. And to view a subject in its own light, you need to understand sources. And as I said, you need to understand propaganda. Now, the question is, how does the losing side write its history? After all, you want to put out a balanced history. You can't just say India did this, India did that, which we didn't. Oh my God, our list of failures in 71 is quite big. But if I was to talk about how does Pakistan write its history, for that one must divert from 71 and understand how did the German army write its history after the Second World War? Because the Pakistanis have simply copied them. It's nothing original. Well, they actually got a platform or from the Americans of all people. So for those of you who are unaware because you're not from this time, in the 1950s, there was an era of a Red Scare in the United States of America and Great Britain. The new public enemy was the Soviet Union. But this was not so for the common American citizen who had lost a brother or perhaps a father or a friend to the German army. Remember, if you lose somebody to Germany, you're obviously going to hate them more than some communist enemy the government is telling you to not like. So one of the strategies the US government came up with is that we are going to separate the SS, which happens to be the radical part of Hitler's government, from the Wehrmacht, which was Hitler's armed forces, because they created this idea of the noble German soldier who fought for his land, who did not kill any Jews or any Gypsies or any Romanians, who was a simple man fighting for his country. And thus you saw a plethora of publications by Heinz Guderian, by von Manstein, which built this myth that the German army was the finest and German engineering is the best and the German mindset is the greatest. Of course, it backfired, and that is what the Pakistanis copied. General Niazi wrote that it wasn't me who orchestrated the massacre, it was General Tikka Khan. I am not to blame. And then Major General Shaukat Reza wrote that although we lost in East Pakistan, we won in West Pakistan. Because remember, a conflict may be decisive, but that does not mean you get to conquer the entire opposing nation. And therefore, people who are unaffected by war directly may feel that the results are slightly different from those who are directly affected. If you were in Berlin in 1945, your interpretation of the war would be very different from if you were in Hamburg. And if you were in Tokyo, well, your interpretation would be completely different from those in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the same applies to West Pakistan and East Pakistan. Once the war was over, their foreign minister and later dictator Zulfikar Ali Bhutto quite eloquently wrote that we haven't lost anything. I mean, the two-nation theory clearly says that we are different from these people. And therefore, we just lost baggage by losing East Pakistan, which isn't exactly a good way to respond to losing half your country, but I mean, how else do you deal with embarrassment? In fact, 1971 stands as an axe in the two-nation theory, because that is simply said that India is a Hindu nation, Pakistan is an Islamic nation. Well, if it was an Islamic nation, East Pakistan and Bangladesh is a majority Islam country. Why couldn't you hold on to them? Because of discrimination, the language barrier, and their hatred for anyone who wasn't a Muslim from West Pakistan. So the conflict is quite simple in its inception, but its execution is outright brilliant. To win a war in 2 weeks, that too with the lowest number of casualties possible, can only be done by a legendary general such as General Sagat Singh. Now, one of the things I'd like to talk to you guys about, because whenever people ask me about the war, they want to know about war stories, because that's the most exciting part. We want to know about the action, the guns, the artillery, the tank battles. Well, let me tell you about the morning of 14th December 1971. It was 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and there happened to be a meeting in the governor's house of Dhaka between the governor, Dr. A.M. Malik, who was the chief administrator of the East Pakistan administration, a representative from the United Nations, the Swedish defense attaché, and the French defense attaché. At 1200 hours, they were having a meeting, and the UN representative asked him, "Sir, the Indian army is on the outskirts of Dhaka. General Sagat Singh has crossed the Meghna. When are you going to put in your papers? Aren't you going to resign or surrender soon?" And he said, "Oh, General Niazi has assured me that we are going to fight till the last man, to the last bullet. We are here for another 50 years. Nothing's going to change." And at that moment, he heard a rumble in the air, a deafening roar. It was the sound of 4 MiG-21s of the Indian Air Force. Around half an hour ago, at Guwahati Air Force Station, the commander of the 28th Squadron of the Indian Air Force, the 1st Supersonics, Wing Commander B.K. Vishnoi, a Veer Chakra winner from 1965, got into his cockpit and prepared a sortie to hit the circuit house of East Pakistan, where Air Force intelligence informed him the meeting was about to be. As he was about to taxi, 2 airmen came running towards his jet. He had to shut down his reheat, and he got them to open the cockpit. And they said, "Sir, the location has changed. Over here, it's from the governor's house." Now, at that time, this is the kind of intelligence we had. Nobody had any idea where this location is. And so he pulled out a tourism map of Dhaka, which he had gathered from a tourism agency who were at that time willing to provide a city tour for 3.5 rupees. He located the governor's house on that map, and he flew the sortie. Now so why were we able to fly into Pakistan unopposed? The answer is because the same man established air supremacy a week ago by knocking the Pakistan Air Force out in 48 hours. A reminder that the coalition air forces could not do this before 100 hours in Operation Desert Storm. We beat the Americans in terms of speed. Though not the Israelis, they did it a bit faster. When he was above the governor's house and he fired his first salvo of S-5 rockets from the UBA-16 rocket pods, the governor ducked under his desk. 5 minutes later, another 2 MiG-21s from the number 4 Uriel squadron hit the same target, and then 4 Hunters from the 37 Black Panthers. By now, the governor was in a trench covering, and he immediately gave his resignation to the ambassador and told him, "I'm willing to surrender." And that is one of the best examples, and that is how we took down the government of East Pakistan in 1971, a single but decisive airstrike. What started, as I said, as a genocide ended with one of the largest surrenders in human history and the second largest in the Cold War and after the Second World War. Such a just battle has never been fought in human history and is truly India's finest hour. Thank you, and Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, Satyajit. I think you should also write with your name a storyteller. The way you have actually told us the entire scenario of it took us back to those timelines, and I was visualizing my history book in my mind. That's a different story. I have been very bad with history, honestly. But I really appreciate that at your age, just 21, I'm sure you've been researching a lot in the last few years. At such a young age, you're so interested in history. A big round of applause for Satyajit, please. Any questions for this young gentleman? Yes.
Hi, Satyajit.
So,
Fantastic research.
Thank you.
Very impressive. I have not read your writing, but I'm very keen to do that. Just wanted to ask you, have you covered the aspect of the Cold War with respect to the 71 war, where US had planned to park its destroyer there and got negated by USSR? So what is the impact the Cold War, what is the impact of the Cold War on our war?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the most essential components of our victory was the Indo-Soviet Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation. What Sir is referring to is when the USS Enterprise, a nuclear aircraft carrier of the US Navy, of the 74th Task Force of the 7th Fleet, crossed the Malacca Straits and prepared to enter the Bay of Bengal. For those of you who are unaware, Pakistan was allied with both the United States of America and China at this time. To counterbalance that, India aligned itself with the USSR. I have covered exactly how this happened in my book, which is coming out soon.
Thanks, man.
Any other question for Satyajit? Okay.
When did you first get interested in this part of history? You seem very passionate about it.
Well, it started when the lockdown began. I, like every other student, had absolutely nothing to do. One of my board exams had been delayed. And I started to construct an air-to-air kill count for the Indian Air Force. Because I was like, how many jets did we shoot down? How many did we lose? That's the most exciting part about warfare, the dogfights. From that, it expanded into how many tanks did we destroy. Okay, because I've done a deep statistical analysis of the usage, the effectiveness, and the loss of every piece of equipment that was used by both sides in the war. In fact, a third of my appendices are statistics themselves. So that's how the journey began. Then the first person I interviewed was late Air Vice Marshal B.K. Bishnoi, one of the finest MiG-21 pilots in the history of the Indian Air Force, and an essential contributor to the surrender of East Pakistan. With that, I simply started interacting with even more veterans from the Air Force, from the Army, from the Navy, relatives of veterans who passed away, and defense experts and journalists. My interest grew, and I decided I have to write a book that covers every single aspect in a way that has never been done before. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to know one thing. Is this second aim of yours that you want to popularize this history of Indo-Pak war for the youth here? What is the way out? As you said that we have only 15th August and 26th Jan histories for us. I'm a veteran from Indian Navy, Captain Sham, and very nice to hear you, very provocative your story. But the second aim is not being fulfilled, and we hardly know about it in the civil streets. So how do you do that?
Well, sir, ever since I began this project, I talked to my friends about it. And each time we would meet, I would tell them a story. For example, of Operation Trident, Operation Python, how we dragged missile boats to the edge of Karachi and blew the PNS Khyber out of the sea. And they were quite fascinated. As you know, my generation likes action more than anything else, whether it's video games, whether it's movies. So it's quite surprising that history doesn't come as a part of that. Now, in my personal experience, history is the most fascinating, most interesting, and most hilarious subject on the planet. And if you don't think so, it's because you've been taught incorrectly. So when I wrote my book, the main audience I had in mind was my friends in my generation. I was like, if they're going to read about this battle, how are they going to feel? What aspect are they going to like? Are they going to like the AK-47 aspect, the tactics, the M16s, the MiG-21s, the Maruts, the Hunters? What aspect? And that's what governed my mind as I wrote every sentence. At the same point of time, I had to look at it through a strategic lens and, of course, do justice to the stories I was told by veterans.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So, like, you are a writer, but you seems more of a storyteller, as ma'am said. Yeah, really, you are very impressive in storytelling. I don't know whether it's the story or it's the reality, but what I have seen, read in the history, so okay, it's good. Like you talked about Bangladesh victory. We formed the Bangladesh, and we were good that time. So can we give the credit to Congress for that?
One of the things I've done is I've remained completely apolitical in my book. You will not find any whitewashing of politics. You will not find me worshipping any politician. That's how I see every operation in the history of India. I do not bring politics into this. In fact, one of the faults I find with the Indian population is that we are far too obsessed with uneducated politicians.
Yes.
And we don't see Indian Army veterans as heroes.
Yes. This is. Yeah. But nowadays, what's happening? It's happening. Whatever is done goes to politicians, no matter what.
I can say the same thing about
Mangalyaan, whether it's Chandrayaan, whatever it is, it goes to politicians.
Well, I'm sorry to tell you that's how things have been forever. So it comes down to historians like me to separate the politics from true achievement, from national achievement.
So, my basic question is, yeah, it's good to satisfy our ego. I mean, it does really well to satisfy our ego that we found Bangladesh and we won that battle, and we won every battle with Pakistan basically. But what about China? I mean, if you will research about China, it will do more benefit to us.
Oh, first.
Yes.
Tell her the General Sagat Singh story of Nathula 67. She'll know it.
As I was talking about in my speech, I mentioned General Sagat Singh. Now, how many of you know we fought a battle to the death with China in 1967?
Yeah.
It was a very short period.
Not
No,
1962.
that wasn't.
1967, not 62. 5 years. See, one of the things as we historians do is that we study people. Because the most important thing to study in history is people. I mean, I could tell you how great the T-55 and the MiG-21 performed in the war, and that's good for model makers or kids looking to buy toys, but that has no strategic significance today. I mean, those are outdated pieces of equipment. What doesn't change is people.
Yes.
And one of the things we learn from history is what people in all professions, in all ages did throughout, and what we must replicate, or more importantly, what we must avoid.
Yeah, we need courageous people like we had in 71's war. We need courageous people like that.
As you'll find out when you read my book, it was quite close. And it was one genius who won us the war, not all of them.
Yeah, it's one genius who won the war.
Any further questions?
Can I ask one? Yeah.
Okay, quick.
So
one.
I think you said that your book covers all the aspects. I want to understand that in this story of a great fight and war and struggle, which India won against Pakistan, is the story of Bangladeshis also covered because they are the main subject?
Of course.
So I found many of these books, they do have a heroic account of what we did and the unheroic account of what Pakistan did, but the main subject matter is forgotten. So that's the question.
Well, of course, I have covered it. It's called the Mukti Bahini. And in fact, I've referred to the Mukti Bahini and the Indian Army fighting together as the Mitro Bahini, which is what they were formerly called. Now, I've mentioned every single Bir Shastro winner of the war and their role, including that of the Kilo Flight, which was the Bangladesh Air Force formed from an otter, a helicopter, and a transport aircraft. Their role was essential. Remember, one of the intelligence reports I received from the Pakistanis, which was given to me by the Indian Air Force, was that more Pakistanis died from March 1971 to December 1971 by the Mukti Bahini than their total number of casualties in 1965. Because in 1965, they lost 300 officers and 2,700 men. From March 1971 to December 1971, they lost 600 officers and 8,000 men. So without covering, so I've obviously covered Mukti Bahini. I think that answers your question.
Okay, one last question, please.
Mr. Satyajit ji, you had a lots of experience and you accumulate so many pages related of the military in your, already I have been a student of the history, I like very much, but could you tell me about that? Have you fact in realistic, because there are so many families are living and our soldiers and our army persons matriarch that time. So have you ever met to them and in any condition and situations you stuck that time when you were searching lots of facts from these kind of the families who sacrificed their lives for the country?
Well, sir, veterans have been very friendly and very encouraging in my work. In fact, if I called somebody up and I said I want an interview, they would have me over to their house for hours and hours for whatever information I need, from their logbooks to their war diaries to whatever questions I had, including controversies, what could have been, what went wrong, what went right, which is an important part of war. And I had the benefit of interviewing, as I said, more than 130 of them.
Very nice. So nice.
Okay, one quick and last one.
There's a lot of demand for me today.
Yeah, and you just knocked it out of the park with the storytelling that you did.
Thank you.
And there's one thing that I want to know from you, that is, yeah, the history that you're telling is, I have one question, and this isn't for everyone in the room, it is just for you. Have you studied and read the book 1984 by George Orwell?
Yes.
That discusses the, okay, then we can have a discussion later on, okay?
Absolutely. Yeah.
1984 by George Orwell, that kind of explains what's happening in the world right now. And the story that he was telling kind of, made me anticipate that he must have known. It doesn't tell that, but it kind of tells that there will be politicians like that in the world today.
Sir, I'd also like to tell you that 1984, the parts it covers on India and Pakistan comes from Ravi Rikhia's book on 1984 known as The Third Round. Oh. That's where he got that portion from.
Okay. And I would love to discover the pandemic theory from it, the 1991 WHO thing as well, UNESCO thing. So yeah, that's a discussion for later. Yeah. But I appreciate you for what you did, and it was great. Thanks a lot.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.